You have 30 days to repaint, or I will make sure the fines stack until you can't afford to live here.
I haven't touched the paint.
Irrelevant. Sign this.
I looked at the citation, then at her, then back at the citation. Patricia Holden had no way of knowing that the paperwork she just shoved in my face, this first move in a sequence of mistakes she was about to make, would eventually be logged as Exhibit 12 in a federal case file that already had her name on it before I ever set foot in this neighborhood. But I didn't say that. I signed, capped the pen, picked up my coffee, watched her walk back to the white Range Rover parked directly across my driveway, blocking it the way people block things when they've decided the rules apply to everyone except themselves. There's a particular kind of person who reads silence as surrender. Patricia Holden was exactly that kind of person, and that was going to be the most expensive assumption she ever made. Have you ever met someone who decided who you were before you got a single word in, and had no idea what that decision was going to cost them? My name is Daniel Reeves, 44 years old. I came to Maplewood Estates with a toolbox, a cash offer, and a therapist's prescription that boiled down to 3 words: find the quiet. 14 years with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit out of Cincinnati will do things to a person. Not the dramatic things people imagine. The shootouts, the raids, the courtroom moments. The real damage is quieter than that. It's the accumulated weight of watching people in positions of trust decide, one small compromise at a time, that the rules were written for someone else. My partner of 12 years, Ray Kowalski, took a bullet on a sting operation that went sideways in March. He survived, barely. I was standing close enough to hear the shot and far enough away to do nothing about it. The Bureau gave me mandatory leave. My therapist gave me homework. Stop living inside the job. Go somewhere ordinary. Remember what normal feels like. So I found a fixer-upper on Birchwood Court. 30 homes, tree-lined streets, a community pool that was apparently closed for renovation going on its 3rd year. I paid cash. No announcement, no moving truck with my name on the side. Just a guy in a worn jacket carrying boxes through a front door that needed a new coat of paint, which I had not yet gotten around to applying. I wasn't hiding. I just wasn't advertising. Those are 2 different things, and they matter. My next-door neighbor introduced himself on day 2. Henderson, retired Army Ranger, 61, the kind of quiet that comes from having nothing left to prove. He brought over a 6-pack and a look that said he'd already sized me up and hadn't decided anything yet, which I respected. "You know about the HOA?" he asked. I read the CC&Rs before I closed. He looked at me for a beat longer than the question required. Most people don't. I know. He cracked his beer, didn't say anything else about it. That was the first small moment. The kind a camera wouldn't catch, just a half-second of recalibration in a man who'd spent a career reading people. He filed me differently after that. I could tell. He just didn't know yet which file to put me in. On day 4, I found a note slid under my door. Henderson's handwriting, tidy and economical, the way men who've written field reports write everything. Patricia patrols Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Decibel meter, not a joke. Welcome to the neighborhood. I folded the note and put it in my kitchen drawer next to a yellow legal pad where I'd already started writing things down. Old habit. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one no one thinks to ask about. There's something they don't teach you at Quantico because it can't be taught in a classroom. It has to be earned the slow way. Through years of watching people abuse systems that were built to protect everyone, but somehow, in the hands of the wrong person, become instruments that protect only them. The lesson is this: the most corrosive thing in any institution isn't the corrupt official who takes the bribe. It's the one who genuinely believes they deserve it. Patricia Holden wasn't a criminal because she was greedy. She was a criminal because somewhere along the way she'd convinced herself that her judgment was the same thing as the rules, that her preferences carried the weight of policy, that her authority over a 30-home HOA in central Ohio was a mandate rather than a volunteer position with a laminated ID and a clipboard. I'd seen that particular delusion before, in city councilmen, in zoning commissioners, in school board members who controlled $2 million budgets and acted like feudal lords. The scale changes, the psychology doesn't. Which is why I had a rule, one I'd held to for 14 years and had no intention of breaking now. Never use the badge to win an argument you can win without it. If I pulled credentials every time someone was rude to me, I'd be doing the same thing Patricia Holden was doing, using institutional authority as a personal weapon. The power isn't wrong, the misuse is. So when she cited me for paint I hadn't applied, I paid the fine and documented everything. Photograph of the original listing, timestamp of my purchase date, copy of the citation, copy of the CC&Rs she was allegedly enforcing. I wasn't building a case yet. Not officially, not with bureau resources, not on personal time during mandatory leave. I was just being careful. Careful is a reflex at this point. After 14 years, documentation isn't something I decide to do. It's something I do the way other people lock the front door, automatically, without thinking about whether tonight is the night it matters. Ray used to say I documented things the way some people pray, covers your past and your future at the same time. I thought about Ray a lot in those first 2 weeks, about how he'd have handled the citation. He'd have laughed, probably, made a joke about HOA presidents being the closest thing America has to petty despots. Then he'd have photographed everything twice. I photographed everything twice. The legal pad in my kitchen drawer was filling up. Dates, times, exact wording, every interaction, however small. Not because I knew where this was going, because I knew the value of a record that starts before anyone realizes a record is being kept. What's the difference between someone who stays quiet because they're afraid and someone who stays quiet because they're already 3 steps ahead? The house on Birchwood Court wasn't just a fixer-upper I'd found on Zillow. It had belonged to my uncle Gerald, retired school teacher, 31 years in the Columbus public school system, a man who coached youth baseball on weekends and kept a vegetable garden in the backyard that was, by every account, an embarrassment to the neighborhood's aesthetic standards and the best source of tomatoes within a 3-mile radius. Gerald died in January. No children, no surviving spouse. He left the house to me in a will that his attorney described with visible admiration as unusually precise. Gerald had been a careful man, the kind who kept receipts going back 2 decades and wrote the date on every jar of homemade salsa in the pantry. I recognized the type. He'd lived in Maplewood Estates for 11 years, long enough to watch Patricia Holden consolidate power across 3 HOA terms, long enough to have sent me, 9 months before his death, a letter I still had folded in the inside pocket of my go bag. Danny, something's wrong with the money here. The pool's been closed for renovation for 2 years, and nobody can get a straight answer about the contractor. I'm probably just an old man seeing shadows, but you'd know better than me. I hadn't acted on it fast enough. That was the weight I carried into this neighborhood. Not grief exactly, or not only grief, but the particular guilt of a man who received a warning from someone he loved and filed it under later. Gerald was gone. The pool was still closed, and the contractor who'd been paid $340,000 for renovations that hadn't happened was a shell company registered to an address that didn't exist. I knew that because I'd looked, quietly, from my desk in Cincinnati, before the shooting, before the leave, before any of this. I hadn't had enough to move on it then. I had 30 days now, the length of Patricia's paint citation, before the next HOA board meeting where she was reportedly pushing through a new round of infrastructure assessments. Another fee, another contractor, another invoice payable to another company that existed only on paper. 30 days. Gerald's legal pad. Gerald's house. Gerald's tomato garden still inexplicably alive in the November cold. I wasn't here to grieve. I was here to finish what he started. The gas station was a shell on Route 40, 10 minutes from the neighborhood. It was a Thursday evening in November, just past 7. I'd driven back from Cincinnati that afternoon, a classified briefing that had nothing to do with Maplewood Estates and everything to do with why I hadn't slept more than 3 hours. I was running on bad coffee and the particular kind of exhaustion that sits behind your eyes and makes everything look slightly too bright. I was in civilian clothes, worn jacket, baseball cap pulled low, nothing that marked me as anything other than a tired man pumping gas on a cold Thursday. That's when the white Range Rover pulled in.
Patricia Holden stepped out with the energy of someone who had never once arrived anywhere quietly. She spotted me in the way predators spot the animal that's already limping, immediate, certain, confident of the outcome before anything had actually happened. She crossed the forecourt like she owned the lease on it. "You're the new man on Birchwood Court." Not a question, a filing system entry. She had categorized me before she finished the sentence. "I'm authorizing your first month's HOA fees waived. Consider it a welcome gift." She paused, letting the word authorizing do its work. "I'll swipe my card for your gas as well." I looked at her for a moment, processed the offer, processed the word authorizing again, the specific choice of it, the way it reframed a gesture of supposed generosity as an act of institutional power, as if the fees were hers to waive because she decided they were, as if paying for my gas was a grant, not a kindness. 14 years of interviewing people who spoke exactly that way. "I appreciate it," I said. "I've got it covered." Her expression shifted. Small movement, a tightening around the eyes, a recalibration. Nobody refused Patricia Holden in a public setting. Certainly not the new man on Birchwood Court who'd already signed her citation without argument. "I insist. It's already decided." "Ma'am, I'm fine." 4 words, quiet. No edge to them, just a door, closed politely. What happened in the next 4 minutes would eventually consume 6 pages of a federal incident report. Raised voice, a crowd of 3, then 5 people at adjacent pumps turning to watch. Accusations of aggression I had not committed, described with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed this particular narrative before. Then her phone out, and the words that would become in 8 months' time Exhibit 34 in a federal indictment. "I need to report a threatening man at the Route 40 Shell. Suspicious background, possibly armed." I stood with my hands visible at my sides and said nothing. Dispatch coded it priority response. 2 cruisers, 6 minutes. She watched them pull in with the satisfaction of someone who had just demonstrated, beyond any doubt, exactly how much power she had. She had no idea she'd just handed me exactly what I needed. What's more dangerous, someone who has real power or someone who has just enough power to believe they're untouchable? The 2 officers who responded were professional, young but professional. The taller one, badge said Mercer, took my ID without ceremony and ran it through his radio, while his partner kept a polite but deliberate distance between me and Patricia, who was standing near the Range Rover delivering her account with the practiced cadence of someone who had done this before. Not this exact thing, but this, the performance of victimhood for an official audience. The clipboard was gone. In its place, a hand pressed lightly to her collarbone, a voice pitched just below distress. I watched Mercer's face while he waited for the return on my ID. Something came back. I couldn't see the screen, but I saw his posture change, a small, almost imperceptible straightening. He looked at me, then at the radio, then at me again. He handed my ID back with both hands. "Sir," he said, careful, neutral, the word doing quiet work. "Officer, can you tell me what happened here?" I told him. Exactly what happened, in the order it happened, without editorializing. The offer, my refusal, the escalation, the call. I spoke the way I'd been trained to speak in depositions, clear, sequential, without adjectives that could be disputed. Mercer wrote it down, all of it. His partner had stopped taking notes from Patricia's side. I noticed that. She noticed it too. I could see it in the way her voice lifted slightly, reaching for the room the way it had at the gas pumps, trying to recapture an audience that was quietly recalibrating. "He was aggressive," she said again, louder this time. Mercer looked at the body camera on his chest, then at me, then at the 4 bystanders who had not left. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to need you to stay right there." He stepped closer to me, lowered his voice. "Is there anything else you want to add to your statement, sir?" There was quite a lot I could have added.
I could have ended the entire evening in about 45 seconds with a single phone call and 2 sentences. I could have watched Patricia Holden's confidence drain in real time as Mercer received information that would have reframed this entire incident for everyone present. I didn't. Not because I couldn't, because it wasn't time. The right move wasn't to stop her here, at a gas station, in front of 3 witnesses and 2 body cameras capturing 40 minutes of a Thursday evening. The right move was to let her believe she'd won this. Let the report get filed the way she wanted it filed.
Let her walk back to that Range Rover thinking she'd demonstrated, once again, exactly what happened to people who didn't cooperate with Patricia Holden. I signed Mercer's witness form with the same pen I'd used on her citation. Old habit. If you had the power to end something right now, but waited, what would have to be true for the waiting to be worth it? That night, I sat at Gerald's kitchen table with the legal pad and wrote down everything. Time of arrival at the Shell, time of Patricia's arrival, exact wording of the offer, authorizing, already decided, because word choice in these situations is never accidental. Time of the call to dispatch, response time, badge numbers, Mercer's name, the 4 bystanders, the body camera units, the exact phrase she'd used on the phone, suspicious background, possibly armed. I underlined that last one. Possibly armed is a specific escalation. It's the kind of language that turns a civil dispute into a use of force situation. It's the kind of language that gets people hurt. She'd chosen it deliberately, or she'd chosen it carelessly, and in either case, it told me something important about how Patricia Holden operated when she felt her authority being questioned. She didn't push back. She weaponized. I'd flagged the Maplewood Estates HOA twice in the past year, anonymous tips to our field office about bid rigging on neighborhood renovation contracts. Both times I'd pulled the thread and found it too thin to pursue officially. Shell companies with clean registrations, payments that looked from the outside like legitimate contractor invoices. Nothing I could take to a supervisor without getting the look that meant you're chasing ghosts again, Reeves. But ghosts leave traces, and now I was living inside the machine. Here was the question I kept circling that night, the one that determined everything about how I needed to play this. If I revealed who I was, even quietly, even just to Mercer, even just enough to stop the gas station incident from going on record the way Patricia wanted, I would lose the one advantage I had. She didn't know she was being watched by someone who already knew what she was. The moment she knew, everything changed. The shell companies would go dormant. Douglas would lawyer up. The contractor would disappear. 14 months of careful work, not just mine, would evaporate because I couldn't hold my position for one uncomfortable Thursday evening at a gas station. So I held it. I went to bed at midnight, set an alarm for 5. The legal pad had 4 new pages. The next morning, I drove to a UPS store in Westerville and rented a private mailbox under my name. Not a P.O. box, a physical street address, the kind that accepts certified mail, registered documents, legal correspondence, the kind that creates a paper trail that looks, to anyone checking, like a man who is exactly what he appears to be, a private citizen dealing with an overreaching HOA. I needed that layer, not for cover. I wasn't running an undercover operation, not officially, not on leave, but because what I was about to do required clean separation between the private citizen at 14 Birchwood Court and the federal agent who happened to live there. There's a line. I'd spent 14 years respecting it. Back home, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Franklin County Property Records database. Public access. Anyone could do it. I cross-referenced every contractor invoice Patricia had submitted for HOA approval over the past 4 years against the Ohio Secretary of State's Business Registry. 3 companies, combined billings of just under $2.1 million over 38 months. The first 2 had sparse but traceable histories, small contractors, real addresses, real phones, real complaints on the Better Business Bureau site. Legitimate, if overpriced. The third one, Crestline Property Solutions, LLC, had a registered agent address on Morse Road that turned out to be a UPS store, incorporated 14 months ago,
No website, no reviews, no employees listed in any public filing. One listed officer, a name I didn't recognize. I wrote the name down, ran it the only way I could run anything right now, publicly. LinkedIn, Franklin County voter registration, Ohio BMV records cross-referenced against the address. Nothing. The name existed on paper and nowhere else. I photographed the screen with my personal phone, uploaded it to an encrypted drive I'd been maintaining since Gerald's letter, added the date, the source URL, the database version timestamp, the kind of metadata that makes a document useful in court rather than just interesting at a kitchen table. Then I drafted a personal email, not bureau, not encrypted, not flagged, to a colleague in the Cincinnati field office I trusted more than almost anyone alive. Hey, when you get a minute, need a second set of eyes on something. Nothing official, just a name. I hit send. Then I went outside and watered Gerald's tomatoes. The citations didn't slow down, they accelerated. Week 3 brought a noise disturbance violation, running my dishwasher after 9 p.m. Henderson confirmed what I'd already suspected. Patricia had a decibel meter and a Tuesday-Thursday patrol schedule she kept with the discipline of someone who genuinely believed the neighborhood's moral fabric depended on it. Week 4, improper recycling bin placement. Bin was 6 inches past the approved staging line. I had a photograph proving otherwise. I paid the fine anyway and added the photograph to the encrypted drive. Week 5. An unregistered vehicle in my driveway. The vehicle was my own car, purchased 3 years ago. Registration current, plates valid. I sent a written response with documentation. Patricia sent back a form letter acknowledging receipt and reissuing the fine with an additional administrative processing fee. The fines were small individually, $40, $65, $90 with the processing fee, the kind of amounts a reasonable person absorbs to avoid conflict, which is exactly what made them effective. Patricia had learned, or been taught, or discovered through years of practice that the real power of small fines isn't financial, it's psychological. Each one is a reminder of who holds the clipboard. By week 6, I had documented 11 separate violations. Cross-referenced against the CC&Rs, 4 of them had no basis in the actual governing documents. 2 referenced rules that had been amended without a proper homeowner vote, which under Ohio Revised Code Section 5312 required written notice to all residents and a recorded majority approval. They hadn't done that. I added Ohio Revised Code 5312 to the legal pad, underlined it twice. What I hadn't expected was the social dimension. By week 5, 2 neighbors had stopped making eye contact when I checked the mail. One woman I'd waved to on day 3 now crossed to the other side of the street. Word had moved through the neighborhood the way it always moves in small, closed communities, quietly, selectively, in the direction someone wanted it to move. Patricia hadn't just been filing citations. She'd been building a case against me with the only jury that mattered to her, the neighborhood itself. The HOA board meeting was the second Tuesday of December, Maplewood Estates Community Center. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, a folding table at the front where Patricia sat flanked by 2 board members whose primary qualification appeared to be an ability to nod in the correct direction at the correct moment. 14 residents attended. I sat in the back row. Henderson sat 2 seats to my left, arms crossed, face neutral in the way of someone who had attended enough of these to know exactly how they ended. Patricia opened with the infrastructure assessment proposal. New contractor, new scope of work, estimated cost $280,000, payable in quarterly HOA fee increases beginning March 1st. No itemized breakdown, no competing bids, no independent engineer's report. I raised my hand. Mr. Reeves. She said my name the way someone says a word they find faintly distasteful. This is a presentation, not a Q&A. The CC&Rs require a line-item budget disclosure for any assessment exceeding $50,000. Is that available? Silence. The kind that lands differently depending on who's in the room. That documentation is being prepared. The vote is scheduled for tonight. The board has reviewed all relevant materials. The homeowners haven't. She set down her pen, looked at me across 14 rows of folding chairs with an expression I recognized from interrogation rooms. The moment a subject decides that patience is no longer serving them. Mr. Reeves. Her voice dropped into a register she probably used on Douglas when the door was closed. Controlled. Final.
The voice of someone who had never needed to raise it because the threat underneath it was always understood.
You've been in this community for 6 weeks. You've accumulated more violations than any resident in the past 3 years. You've disrupted 2 prior meetings with procedural objections that frankly suggest you have either too much time on your hands or some kind of personal grievance that has nothing to do with this neighborhood's well-being. She paused, let it settle. People like you come into established communities and mistake disruption for participation. I've seen it before. The board sees it, and frankly, your neighbors see it too. People like you. 3 words, delivered in front of 14 residents, 2 board members,
and a recording device she didn't know Henderson had placed on the seat beside him 18 minutes earlier.
I wrote them down that night, word for word. People like you. Exhibit 47. How many people in that room do you think already knew something was wrong and said nothing because the cost of speaking felt too high? The assessment passed, 11 votes to 3. Henderson voted no. A woman named Carol Briggs, 72, who'd lived on Birchwood Court for 19 years, voted no. A younger man in the 3rd row, whose name I didn't yet know, voted no. Everyone else raised their hand, because that's what you do when the person holding the clipboard has spent 3 terms making the cost of disagreement quietly, persistently, undeniably high. 3 days after the vote, I received a certified letter. Franklin County Municipal Court.
Small claims filing. Patricia Holden, in her capacity as HOA board president, was pursuing collection of my outstanding fines, 11 citations totaling $847 plus $340 in administrative fees, plus court filing costs. The hearing date was set for January 14th. She was taking me to court. I read the filing twice, noted the case number, noted the presiding magistrate, noted that the filing had been prepared by a law firm, Greer and Associates, that I recognized from Douglas Holden's campaign finance disclosures, which I had been reading quietly for the past 3 weeks. I called Henderson that evening. She filed on you, he said. It wasn't a question. January 14th. A pause. She's done this before. Guy named Peterson, 4 years back, disputed a landscaping fine. She buried him in paperwork until he sold and moved to Gahanna.
What was Peterson's background? High school vice principal. Good man. Just wanted to retire somewhere quiet. Did he have a lawyer? Couldn't afford the kind it would have taken. I thanked Henderson and hung up. The next morning, I called the Ohio Attorney General's HOA Enforcement Division. Public line. Anyone could call it. I described the situation, the undisclosed contractor relationships, the assessment without itemized disclosure, the citations referencing rules not properly amended under ORC 5312, and asked what the formal complaint process looked like. The intake officer walked me through it. Standard procedure, written complaint, supporting documentation, 30 to 60-day review period. I filed that afternoon. Clean, factual, referenced to statute. No names beyond what the public record already contained. No mention of the gas station. No mention of Crestline Property Solutions. Just the procedural violations, documented and dated, the kind of complaint any informed homeowner could file. Exactly the kind of complaint any informed homeowner could file. Patricia found out within 48 hours. I don't know how. Douglas had connections in the AG's office, or someone on staff talked, or she simply had the instincts of someone who had been running a closed system long enough to feel when a door had been opened. She responded the way cornered people respond when they believe they still hold the stronger hand. She called an emergency board session and voted to place 14 Birchwood Court on formal delinquency status, meaning if the outstanding fines weren't paid in full within 15 days, the HOA had the right, under their governing documents, to place a lien on the property, a lien on Gerald's house. The board voted unanimously. Even the three who'd said no on the assessment. Henderson slid a note under my door that night. They got to Carol. Don't know how. Be careful. I folded it, added it to the file. 4 new pages on the legal pad. Magistrate Claire Okafor ran her courtroom the way good magistrates run small claims. Efficiently, without theater, with the particular attentiveness of someone who had heard every variation of neighbor disputes and could usually tell within the first 4 minutes which party had done their homework. She looked at me when I walked in. Not the way people look at someone they recognize, the way people look at someone who doesn't fit the category they were expecting. Patricia had brought Greer, the attorney from the campaign finance filings, silver-haired, comfortable in his suit, the kind of comfortable that comes from years of winning cases in rooms exactly like this one. He set a neat stack of folders on the table and nodded at Patricia with the quiet confidence of a man who considered this particular hearing a formality. I sat at the respondent's table alone. No attorney. A manila folder. A pen. Greer noticed. Patricia noticed. She leaned toward him and said something I couldn't hear, and he responded with a small, reassuring shake of his head. The visual language was clear. This won't take long. Magistrate Okafor opened the file. Mr. Reeves, you're representing yourself today? Yes, Your Honor. She looked at me for a half-second longer than the question required. Same recalibration I'd seen in Mercer at the gas station. Something in the way I'd said, Your Honor. Not nervous, not performative, just accurate. The word landing with the weight of someone who had said it in rooms considerably larger than this one. She moved on without comment, but she'd noticed. Greer presented Patricia's case methodically. 11 citations, documented violations, failed payment, procedural compliance with the HOA's governing documents. Clean, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a $400 an hour attorney billing a favor to an alderman's wife. When it was my turn, I presented 4 things. The photograph proving the recycling bin placement citation was factually incorrect. The ORC 5312 amendment records showing 2 of the cited rules had never been properly ratified. A printed copy of the HOA's own CC&Rs with the relevant disclosure requirements highlighted, and a 1-page summary of the AG complaint I'd filed, case number included, currently under active review. Greer stopped writing. Magistrate Okafor read the summary twice. She set it down carefully, the way you set something down when you want to remember exactly where you put it. Mr. Reeves, she said, where did you say you were from? I didn't, I said. Have you ever watched someone realize, mid-sentence, that they've been reading the room completely wrong? Magistrate Okafor dismissed 4 of the 11 citations on procedural grounds. The remaining 7 she declined to rule on pending resolution of the AG complaint. No judgment against me. No collection order. No lien authorization. Not yet. She gave both parties 30 days and scheduled a follow-up hearing. Greer packed his folders with the careful movements of a man recalculating something. Patricia walked out of that courtroom with her jaw set and her eyes doing the thing eyes do when a person is already planning the next move before the current one has finished failing. She filed the lien anyway. Not through the court. Okafor had blocked that channel. Through the HOA's private governing authority, using a clause in the original Maplewood Estates Declaration documents drafted in 1987 that gave the board the right to record a notice of assessment lien directly with the Franklin County Recorder's Office without a court order, provided the delinquency exceeded 30 days and the board had voted to authorize it. They had voted, unanimously, even Carol. The lien hit the county recorder's system on a Friday afternoon in late December. I found out Saturday morning when I checked the property records database, the same public database I'd been using to track Crestline Property Solutions. A lien on Gerald's house. It didn't affect my ability to live there, not immediately, but it attached to the title, which meant I couldn't refinance, couldn't transfer the deed cleanly, couldn't do anything with the property that required a clear title, which, in a federal investigation involving asset documentation, created complications I didn't have time to manage. More immediately, it was public record. Anyone searching the property would see it, and in 8 months, if the HOA chose to pursue it, they had the legal right to initiate foreclosure proceedings under Ohio law. Foreclosure on Gerald's house. I sat at the kitchen table with that thought for a long time. Outside, the November cold had finally killed most of the tomato plants. One was still holding on, a stubborn late-season cluster, green going slowly red on a vine that should have given up 2 weeks ago. Gerald had planted that variety specifically because it was slow. The slow ones are always sweeter, he'd written in the margin of his gardening journal, which I'd found in the pantry next to 27 jars of salsa, all dated, all labeled in his careful schoolteacher's hand. I thought about Gerald writing that note to me 9 months ago. Danny, something's wrong with the money here. I thought about Ray taking a bullet while I stood close enough to hear the shot. I thought about what it cost, every time, to hold a position when everything in you wanted to move. Then I opened my laptop and called my contact in Cincinnati. "I need to go official," I said. "How fast can you get me a RICO filing authorization?" My contact in Cincinnati was Senior Agent Diane Forsyth, 17 years in white-collar crime. The kind of agent who read financial disclosures the way other people read novels, for pleasure, for pattern, for the small moments where the story stops making sense and something true begins to show through. She called me back in 4 hours. "The name you sent me," she said. No preamble. Diane never used preamble. "The listed officer on Crestline Property Solutions." "Yeah." "It's Patricia Holden's maiden name. Middle name, technically. Her full name at birth was Patricia Crestline Holden. She dropped Crestline after she married Douglas." The kitchen went very quiet. "The registered agent address," I said. "UPS store on Morse Road. Opened 14 months ago, 3 weeks after the HOA voted to approve the first renovation contract. The store's records show the box was rented by a woman matching Patricia's description, paid cash, gave a contact number that's since been disconnected." I looked at the legal pad, at the name I'd circled 3 weeks ago. "Diane, I need a RICO filing authorization." A pause, the kind that means someone is deciding how much to say. "Daniel, you're on leave." "I'm aware. Anything you've gathered in a personal capacity is admissible as citizen evidence that prompted an official investigation. I haven't used bureau resources. I haven't run unauthorized database queries. Everything I have came from public records, personal observation, and one personal email that you can characterize any way you need to." Another pause, longer. "How solid is the shell company connection?" "Solid enough that a first-year prosecutor could walk it into a grand jury." "And the gas station incident?" "Recorded. 2 body cameras, dispatch log, 4 civilian witnesses. Her exact words on the 911 call are already in the county system." I paused. "She reported a federal agent to law enforcement as a threatening suspect, Diane, while that federal agent was the lead investigator on a RICO inquiry naming her as a primary subject." The silence on the line had a different quality now. "That's either the unluckiest thing she's ever done," Diane said slowly, "or the dumbest. In my experience, those are usually the same thing." I heard her exhale, the sound of someone closing a door on hesitation. "I'll need 48 hours to get the authorization papered properly. You'll need to come in and make a formal statement about the personal observation timeline, everything from Gerald's letter forward. We'll need to document the recusal issue since it's your family property." "Already drafted." "Of course you have." A beat. "Daniel, the lien." "I know." "We can't move on it until the authorization clears." "I know." "That means it stays on the title for at least—" "Diane." I looked out the window at Gerald's last tomato plant, still holding on in the December cold. "I've been holding this position for 6 weeks. I can hold it 48 more hours." She hung up. I added 4 words to the legal pad. Authorization, 48 hours, hold. Then I underlined Gerald's name at the top of the page. The authorization took 72 hours, not 48. In that window, 3 things happened. First, Patricia filed an emergency motion with Franklin County Municipal Court requesting an expedited lien enforcement hearing, citing my AG complaint as evidence of bad faith litigation designed to delay legitimate debt collection. Greer had found a sympathetic ear in a different magistrate, not Okafor, and gotten it on the docket for December 28th, 4 days away. Second,
Douglas Holden's office issued a statement through the city alderman's communications director describing an ongoing pattern of harassment by a newcomer to Maplewood Estates directed at volunteer community leaders. It ran in a local neighborhood newsletter with a circulation of about 800. 3 residents sent me copies, anonymously, slid under the door or left in the mailbox without a return address. I didn't know if they were sending them as warnings or as something else. I filed them either way. Third, Henderson came to my door on the evening of December 26th. He stood on the porch in his coat and didn't come inside, which meant what he had to say was short. "Patricia's calling a community meeting," he said. "January 2nd, Community Center. She's telling people it's about neighborhood safety." "Is it?" "It's about you." He looked at me steadily. "She's been going door to door, telling people you have a history of disputes with HOAs, that you've been harassing board members, that the AG complaint is a known tactic used by, quote, professional agitators to destabilize community governance." He paused. "She told Carol you might be dangerous." I stood with that for a moment. How many people believe her? Enough. He held my gaze. "Daniel, I've been watching people since Fallujah. I don't know exactly who you are or what you did before you came here, but I know what you're not, and I know what she is." He put his hands in his coat pockets. "I just thought you should know what you're walking into." I thanked him. He nodded once and went back across the yard. I closed the door and stood in Gerald's hallway. This was the part they don't show in the procedural dramas. The part between the authorization and the operation. When you've done everything right and the machinery is moving, but the timeline belongs to someone else, and the damage keeps accumulating in the meantime. The lien was on the title. The statement was in the newsletter. 800 people had read Douglas Holden's description of me. Carol Briggs, who'd voted no on the assessment and meant it, had been flipped by whatever quiet pressure Patricia applied to 72-year-old women who'd lived in a neighborhood long enough to have something to lose. The authorization was sitting on Diane's desk, waiting for a supervisor's signature. And in 6 days, Patricia Holden was going to stand in front of however many neighbors she could assemble and present her case against the dangerous newcomer at 14 Birchwood Court. I thought about Gerald, about Ray, about 14 years of holding positions that felt untenable right up until the moment they weren't. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, opened the legal pad to a fresh page, wrote one line at the top. January 2nd. How much does it cost a person, not in money, but in something harder to replace, to stay silent while someone dismantles their name in front of people they'll have to live beside? The authorization came through on December 29th. I drove to Cincinnati that afternoon, sat across from Diane in a conference room I'd been in hundreds of times, and gave a formal recorded statement covering everything from Gerald's letter to the lien filing. 4 hours. Every date, every document, every exchange. The gas station incident, the board meeting, Magistrate Okafor's courtroom, Henderson's recordings. Diane listened the way she always listened. Still, precise, occasionally writing a single word on her notepad that I could never quite read from across the table. When I finished, she closed her folder. Case file 2024-CR-1847, she said. RICO inquiry, municipal contract fraud. Primary subjects, Patricia Ann Holden and Douglas Warren Holden. She looked at me. "You're the lead. I know. You've been the lead since the first anonymous tip 14 months ago. I know. Which means you've been living inside your own active investigation for 6 weeks. Technically, I've been on leave." She gave me the look she reserved for statements that were technically true and completely beside the point. "The gas station 911 call," she said. "She reported the lead investigator on her own case as a threatening suspect. Yes, that's probable cause for obstruction, on top of everything else. I know." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the conference room window, Cincinnati sat gray and cold under a December sky that couldn't decide between overcast and something worse. "Gerald would have liked this," she said. It surprised me. She'd never met him. Then I remembered I'd mentioned him in my original tip documentation 14 months ago. Diane read everything. A retired school teacher who noticed something wrong and wrote a letter to the right person.
She paused. That's most of how this job works, actually. Someone notices, someone writes it down, someone else picks it up. I thought about Gerald's kitchen table, the legal pad, the salsa jars with their careful dates. The slow ones are always sweeter. Diane. My voice came out quieter than I intended. The lien. We'll have it vacated as part of the asset freeze order, 24 hours after the arrests. I nodded, looked at the table. He left me the house because he trusted me to do something about it. You did. It took 14 months. Daniel. She waited until I looked up. It took exactly as long as it needed to. I drove back to Maplewood Estates in the dark. January 2nd was 3 days away. The community center held 26 people on the night of January 2nd. Almost every household in Maplewood Estates. Folding chairs pulled into tight rows, the same fluorescent lights, the same folding table at the front. But this time, Patricia had added something new. A projection screen, a laptop, and a printed handout waiting on every chair when people arrived. I picked mine up on the way in, sat in the back row, read it while people settled. It was titled, Protecting Our Community, a Concerned Resident Profile. My name was at the top. Below it, a curated timeline of my pattern of behavior since arriving in Maplewood Estates. The citations, the AG complaint, described as a known harassment tactic. The small claims hearing, framed as a court appearance for non-payment. The gas station incident, and here she had been careful, surgical, described only as a confrontation with law enforcement resulting in a police response, with no other detail, no context, no mention of who had called or why. At the bottom, a line in bold. This individual's background and intentions remain unknown to our community. We deserve to know who is living among us. Henderson was 2 seats to my left. He read his copy without expression, set it face down on his knee. Patricia opened at 7 o'clock precisely. She was composed, authoritative. She had done this before. Not this exact thing, but the architecture of it was familiar. The concerned tone, the careful language, the appeal to community safety as the frame for what was, at its core, a personal campaign. She walked through the handout point by point, the citations, the disputes, the pattern. She was 8 minutes in when the community center door opened. I walked in. I had been there the whole time. She simply hadn't seen me in the back row, or hadn't looked, or hadn't wanted to look. She stopped mid-sentence when she registered me standing, moving toward the front of the room along the side wall, a manila folder in my hand. Mr. Reeves. Her voice tightened. This meeting is for concerned residents. I am a concerned resident. I set the manila folder on the table beside her laptop, opened it. I'm also something else. I placed my credentials on the table. FBI identification. Special Agent Daniel Reeves, Public Corruption Unit, Cincinnati Field Office. Photograph, badge number, federal issue, the real thing because there is no other kind. The room went silent in the particular way rooms go silent when something has shifted and no one has yet processed what it means. Patricia looked at the credentials, then at me, then at the credentials again. I gave her a moment. She deserved the full moment. My name is Daniel Reeves, I said, to the room, not to her. Clear, measured, the voice I used when I needed a jury, or, in this case, 26 neighbors, to understand something precisely. I'm a special agent with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit out of Cincinnati. I've been assigned to case file 2024-CR-1847, a RICO inquiry into municipal contract fraud, since it was opened 14 months ago based on anonymous tips from a resident of this neighborhood. I let that land. The primary subjects of that investigation are Patricia Holden and her husband, City Alderman Douglas Holden. The sound in the room was not a gasp. It was more specific than that. It was the sound of 26 people exhaling something they had been holding for a long time without knowing they were holding it. Patricia's hand found the edge of the table. "This is," she started. "Mrs. Holden." Quiet. Final. The same door-closing tone she'd used on me at the board meeting. "I'd strongly recommend you stop talking." I turned back to the room. Crestline Property Solutions, LLC.
the contractor that received $340,000 in HOA funds for renovation work that was never performed, is registered under Patricia Holden's birth middle name. The registered agent address is a UPS store on Morse Road, rented in cash 14 months ago. I placed a document on the table. Franklin County Recorder's Office, official seal. This is the public registration record. Anyone in this room can verify it tomorrow morning. Second document, Ohio Secretary of State business filing. This is the Crestline Incorporation record, filed 3 weeks after this HOA voted to approve the first renovation contract. Third document. This is the 911 call transcript from a Shell station on Route 40, November of last year. In it, Mrs. Holden reports, and I'm quoting directly from the dispatch record, a threatening man, suspicious background, possibly armed. The man she reported was me, the lead investigator on her own federal case. I looked at her. That call is now part of a federal obstruction filing. Greer, who had apparently been sitting in the third row, stood up. My client has nothing to... Mr. Greer, Diane Forsyth stepped through the community center door. Behind her, 2 agents I recognized from the Cincinnati office. We're not here for statements tonight. She crossed to the table and placed a document in front of Patricia, then another in front of the 2 board members who'd voted on every assessment for the past 3 years. Federal arrest warrants. Franklin County, signed that afternoon. Patricia Holden looked at the warrant, at Diane, at me. For the first time since I had moved into this neighborhood, she had nothing to say. Mrs. Holden, I said, you've been under federal investigation since before I moved in. Tonight simply accelerated the timeline. She called the FBI on the FBI. Henderson, still in the back row, set his copy of the handout on the chair beside him, folded his hands, said nothing. He didn't need to. 26 people had just watched Patricia Holden spend 40 years building a wall and hand the person she'd been trying to keep out the only tool that could bring it down. Patricia and Douglas Holden were arrested before midnight. So were their contracted city inspector, a man named Garrett Voss, who had signed off on $340,000 worth of work he had never visited, and 2 aldermen from Douglas's office whose names appeared in the Shell Company's secondary banking records. 5 arrests in total. Greer showed up at the county jail at 2 in the morning with a briefcase and the expression of a man who had just watched a retainer fee become a very long project. The lien on Gerald's house was vacated 71 hours later as part of the asset freeze order. I was standing in the kitchen when the county recorder's update hit the property database. I checked it twice. Then I closed the laptop and made coffee and stood at the window for a while without doing anything in particular. The recovered funds, $1.9 million once the full forensic accounting was completed, were placed in a court-administered restitution account. The HOA reconstituted under an emergency board that included Henderson, Carol Briggs, and the young man from the third row, whose name turned out to be Marcus Webb, voted unanimously to use the first disbursement for one thing: the pool. Actual contractors this time, competing bids, an independent engineer's report, full line item disclosure posted on the community bulletin board and emailed to every household. Construction began in March. Henderson and I watched them break ground from his front porch on a cold Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, neither of us saying much because neither of us needed to. Gerald would have liked this, he said finally. Yeah. He ever tell you about the pool before it closed? He mentioned it. Henderson nodded. He used to swim laps every morning. 6 a.m., never missed. Said it was the only time the neighborhood was quiet enough to think. He looked at the construction equipment moving in the distance. I think he'd have been out there at 6:01 the first morning it reopened. I thought about Gerald's letter. Danny, something's wrong with the money here. Written 9 months before his death by a retired school teacher who swam laps at 6 a.m. and kept careful dates on his salsa jars and trusted that the right person would eventually pick up the thread. The slow ones are always sweeter. I went back inside and sat at his kitchen table. The legal pad was full, every page, front and back. I tore out the last sheet, the one with January 2nd written at the top, and folded it into the file with everything else.
Then I opened a new legal pad, wrote one line. Gerald was right.
Ray called that evening from his rehab facility in Dayton, voice stronger than it had been in months. We talked for an hour about nothing important: baseball, bad coffee, a book he'd been reading, and it was the best conversation I'd had in a year. Some things take exactly as long as they need to. When was the last time you trusted that doing the right thing slowly was still doing the right thing? This is the end of the story. If it stayed with you, the waiting, the patience, the moment the truth finally landed where it needed to, share it with someone who needed to hear it today.
It was about what happens when someone confuses authority with ownership. When someone decides that the rules exist to protect everyone, accept them, and then builds an entire life around that assumption. Patricia Holden wasn't unusual. That's the uncomfortable truth. The specific version of her lives in HOAs and city councils and HR departments and family dynamics all over this country. The clipboard changes. The psychology doesn't. She had real power over real people, and she used it not to serve the community she was supposed to represent, but to extract from it, quietly, incrementally, in amounts small enough that no single person could justify the cost of fighting back. That's how it works when someone is good at it. She lost for one reason. She assumed that silence meant weakness. She saw a man who wouldn't argue back, who signed citations without protest, who sat in the back row and said nothing, and she read that as surrender, as someone she could file away and forget about. She had no way of knowing that the silence wasn't fear. It was documentation. Every citation she issued became an exhibit. Every overreach became a thread. Every time she escalated, the gas station, the lien, the community meeting, she handed him exactly what he needed. She didn't just lose. She built the case against herself. And Daniel won because he understood something most people never learn. Patience isn't passivity. Strategic silence isn't weakness. And the most powerful thing you can do when someone is abusing a system is become fluent in that system before you challenge it. He didn't match her energy. He matched her documents. He didn't fight her with volume. He let her use all of hers. And when the moment came, when it was finally time to step forward, he didn't need to raise his voice. He just placed his credentials on the table and let 14 months of careful, quiet work speak for itself. That's not a story about being an FBI agent. That's a story about preparation. About understanding that how you respond to provocation is often the most important strategic decision you can make. Most of us have met some version of Patricia Holden. Maybe not in an HOA. Maybe in a workplace. Maybe in a family. Someone who mistakes your patience for permission. Someone who reads your restraint as an invitation to keep going. And the hardest thing, the thing that costs something real, is holding your position long enough for the truth to do what anger never could. Gerald knew something was wrong and wrote it down. Daniel picked it up and carried it forward. And a pool that had been closed for 3 years finally opened in March. Slow things are often the most durable. If stories like this one stay with you, stories about quiet competence, institutional accountability, and what real patience actually looks like in practice, there's more coming. Stick around. But I want to leave you with one question. When Patricia shoved that first citation in his face on day one, the one for paint he hadn't even applied yet, Daniel signed it, capped the pen, and said nothing. Would you have?